toddler Dogman is a real troublemaker. Dear Scary Stories NYC, when I was a kid, my mother was known as the biggest pushover in the county. Kids would go to her house for lunch when their own mothers were serving something they didn't like. My mom would cook them whatever they wanted, like she was running some kind of free restaurant. But there was one summer when she didn't only bend over backwards to please all the kids within 200 miles. That summer, my mother also became the caretaker to a very mischievous little Dogman. Mom is getting on in years now, but I recently convinced her to write down all her memories about that summer with the little Dogman puppy. I ended up having to transcribe a lot of this myself, and I can assure you that this has been a labor of love. Before we get to that, though, I asked my dad to explain how we got into this situation to start with. Here that is in Dad's own words. Take it away, Dad. As I was hiking through the dense forest with my son, we stumbled upon an injured mother Dogman and her tiny pup. It was clear to me that the mother was unable to walk or fend for herself, and the pup was helpless without her care. My heart went out to them both, and I knew that we couldn't leave them there to suffer. We carefully approached the mother Dogman, trying to show her that we were there to help her. At first, she was understandably defensive, growling at us and baring her teeth. But as she saw that we meant no harm, and that we were there to help, she began to calm down. My son and I quickly assessed her injuries and determined that we needed to get her medical attention right away. We used a makeshift sled to transport her and her pup out of the forest and into our truck. It was an awkward and difficult journey, but we knew we had to do everything we could to save them. As we drove toward the nearest animal hospital, my heart was racing with both fear and hope. I couldn't help but think about the life this Dogman had led before we found her, and what she might have gone through to end up in such a vulnerable state. But I was also hopeful that we could provide her with the care she needed, and a chance at a continued happy life with her pup. When we arrived at the animal hospital, the staff was able to stabilize the mother Dogman and begin treating her injuries, which were severe, but not life-threatening. They also examined her pup, who was thankfully healthy and only needed some basic care and attention. For the next 5 or 6 weeks, my son and I visited the hospital every day, checking on that mother Dogman and bringing them whatever they needed. In the meantime, I brought the pup home for my wife to take care of. It quickly became part of our family, and it was incredible to watch as it adapted its life to us. While I never expected to find a mother Dogman and her pup while hiking with my son, I am grateful for the experience. It brought us closer together, and it gave us the opportunity to make a real difference in the lives of these amazing creatures. Thanks, Dad. Now, more or less in my mother's words, is the story of that crazy summer when a baby Dogman lived with us, as told in my mother's own words. Take it away, Mom. It was a beautiful summer evening when my husband came home with a tiny furry bundle in his arms. At first I couldn't quite make out what it was. It was so small and wiggly that it just looked like a ball of fluff. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized that my husband had brought home a Dogman pup. I was both bewildered and delighted. I had never seen a Dogman pup or adult in real life before, and I didn't know what to expect. My husband introduced me to the pup, who was still squirming and yipping in his arms. It was clear right away that this guy was going to be a handful. How could I say no to those soulful, pleading eyes, though? And it's not like it would be forever. The pup's mother would be better in about a month to come take him back. Easy, right? Wrong. For starters, the pup was surprisingly human-like. He'd sit on his haunches and watch TV with me, pawing at the screen whenever there was something he liked. He'd also try to imitate my speech, albeit in a garbled, barky way. It was cute and all until he started mimicking some choice curse words whenever I stubbed my toe or dropped something. I was terrified his mom would come back and find her baby dog spewing obscenities. And then there were his shenanigans. The Dogman pup had a sense of humor all his own. One day I came back from the grocery store to find him standing atop the kitchen counter, wagging his tail happily, while sending apples and oranges flying onto the floor. Another time I caught him creating a bathtub out of my laundry basket, which he had filled with water and was splashing about in. And let's not even get started on the time he decided to try his paw at finger painting with my makeup collection. All in all, the Dogman puppy was a handful, but a lovable one. I bonded with him, despite the chaos. Over that period of time, I had the pleasure of watching this little Dogman pup grow and learn. He was absolutely adorable, with big bright eyes and floppy ears. He was always overflowing with energy, chasing his tail, or pawing at our shoelaces. He would also try to mimic our movements. If we clapped, he would clap, but his paws were too big and clumsy to do it properly. Despite his clumsiness, the Dogman pup was incredibly lovable. He would curl up in my lap and look at me with his curious eyes, and I couldn't help but smile. There was something about the way he wagged his tail that was so sincere and endearing. Of course, having a Dogman pup in the house was also a challenge. We had to spend a lot of time training him, teaching him not to chew on the furniture or run off with our shoes. But even when he was being difficult, it was hard to stay mad at him. His wagging tail and goofy grin were impossible to resist. As the Dogman pup grew bigger and more boisterous, he became even funnier. Watching him romp around the yard or try to catch his own shadow was endlessly entertaining. And even when he got into mischief, like digging up the garden or chasing a cat, it was hard not to find it amusing. As I look back on those early days with the Dogman pup, it's hard not to smile. He was such a cute and funny little guy, full of energy and mischievousness. One day I was trying to give the living room a thorough sprucing up. I had gotten one of those robot vacuums that was meant to make my life easier, but now it seemed like the puppy was determined to sabotage it. Every time the vacuum would come near him, he'd pounce on it and try to catch it in his mouth, making it beep and whir in protest. As I sit down to write about the crazy situations I've experienced while raising that Dogman pup, I can't help but chuckle at the memories that flood into my mind. It isn't every day that you come across a furry creature that has human-like abilities and that mischievous sense of humor. Here are just 10 of the crazy situations that I experienced while raising my little canine monster that I didn't want to leave out of this article. 1. The first time my puppy walked on his hind legs and grabbed a cereal box out of my hand, leaving me in complete shock and disbelief. 2. The day I came home to find chewed up clothes and furniture scattered all around my house. For some reason it took me a while to realize that the pup was the culprit. 3. The time he picked up a bowling ball with ease and rolled it down the hallway, celebrating and cavorting as that ball knocked over everything in its path, including my antique hall table. 4. The embarrassment of trying to walk my Dogman puppy in public, as he often walked on his hind legs and acted like a human until we trained him out of that. 5. The time he snatched a bone straight out of the mouth of a much larger dog at the park, leaving everyone in awe of his strength and abilities. 6. The shock and disbelief of learning that my puppy had learned how to open doors, leading to a string of unwanted adventures around the house. 7. The time I found him staring back at me from the top shelf of the closet, surrounded by countless missing items that he had snatched from around the house. 8. The shock of waking up in the middle of the night to find my puppy standing on my chest, peering down at me with his big googly eyes and a scheming grin on his face. 9. The all-out sprint to chase down my little escape artist when he made a run for it through the open gate. And 10. The day my friend came over to visit and found my Dogman puppy sitting at the kitchen table, snacking on a bowl of ice cream. Raising a Dogman puppy is definitely not for the faint of heart, but it was an adventure that I wouldn't have traded for the world. I never knew what he would get into next. You know, as I remember walking down the street with the leash in my hand, I remember the sense of excitement and also fear that bubbled up inside me. I had been left in charge of a Dogman puppy, Unlike any other puppy I'd ever seen, the little guy could walk on his hind legs. He had hands instead of paws, and he was insanely intelligent and mischievous. Yet he couldn't speak, because he had a canine head. I had always been a lover of all animals, but this little guy stole my heart from the very moment I laid eyes on him. His big brown eyes and adorable ears were simply irresistible. I knew I had to do my best to take care of him, even if it meant cleaning up one mess after another. I remember bringing him to the local supermarket. I didn't know what to expect. He was so small and cute, I just knew he would love walking down the aisles with me. But to my surprise, he had different plans in mind. As we walked down the aisle, the Dogman puppy made his way over to the baking supplies section. Before I knew it, he had grabbed a big bag of flour and thrown it in the air, creating a dust storm that left us both covered in white powder. People around us were staring, and I could tell they were wondering what kind of a creature this was. I apologized to the store manager as I tried to clean up the mess, but I couldn't help but laugh at the pup's mischievous grin. He had done all this deliberately, and he sat in the middle of the mess, covered in flour, looking quite proud of himself. The manager took a photo of the situation and posted it on the front door of the supermarket under the headline, "This is why we don't allow pets into our store any longer." The sign was stolen by some kid, no doubt, before I could go take a picture of the picture. I didn't blame them. My Dogman puppy was beautiful. I thought about trying to audition him for dog modeling jobs, but I figured he'd destroy all the camera equipment just for the fun of it, and I decided against the idea. Another time we were walking in our local neighborhood, and the little rascal decided to stop and watch a group of kids who were playing basketball in a schoolyard past an old chain-link fence. I let him watch for a while. Then I tried to resume walking, but that little guy wasn't budging. He really wanted to study the players and the game they were playing. Then he forgot all his training and rose up to his hind legs in public, running through a hole in that fence into the schoolyard. I had to let go of his leash or get pulled in there as well. Instead of just watching from the sidelines, that Dogman puppy decided he could play better than any of those kids. In spite of the fact that he was half their size and wearing a collar and leash, that little guy jumped up and stole the ball right from under their noses. Then he ran off, dribbling the ball with one paw as he ran. He already understood all the basics of the game, which you gotta admit, most dogs never learn. As he ran away with the ball, the kids chased after him, laughing and yelling. I had to chase after him too, trying to catch up with his fast little legs. When I finally caught him and took the ball back, the kids were all impressed by his skills, and they also couldn't stop talking about how smart he was. "Hey, what kind of dog is that, lady?" I kept getting asked over and over and over. And what I replied to them was, he's the kind of dog who's only gonna get walked in our own backyard from now on. The Dogman puppy may have been mischievous, but he was also very clever. One time I had just mopped the floor when he ran into the kitchen, picked up the mop, and started wiping the floor again himself. I couldn't believe my eyes. Of course, he was only making a mess, but he was trying to imitate my movements like a little canine monkey. Another time, he managed to climb up on the kitchen counter and sneak up on an unsuspecting loaf of bread, which he then pounced on, wrestled to the kitchen floor, battling the loaf until its inevitable surrender and demise. That Dogman boy then proceeded to tear the overpriced artisan bread apart, like it was his kill, and scatter it all over the room. I'm the one who had to clean up the mess, of course, but I admit, no matter how annoying he can be, I would always eventually laugh at his antics. Somehow his way of being annoying just made me feel that I mattered. I think it was his way of showing love, that's all. Despite all the trouble he caused, I couldn't help but love him. The Dogman puppy was always full of surprises and always kept me on my toes. In that sense, he was just like any other puppy, curious and energetic, but he also had a unique charm that I couldn't resist. As he grew older, the Dogman puppy started to show signs of intelligence that were beyond anything I'd ever seen in a dog before. He would watch me as I worked around the house, and sometimes he would try to mimic my actions, like sweeping the floor as I told you about before, or folding the laundry, which he absolutely had no talent at whatsoever. He did have a very talented sense of smell, though, and I would sometimes hide treats around the house for him to find. It was always fun to watch him sniff out the treats and figure out how to get to them. Despite his intelligence, the Dogman puppy was still just a puppy, and he had his fair share of accidents. Like one time he got into a big bag of garbage and made a huge mess in the living room. It was disgusting, but I couldn't help but find it funny, as he looked up at me with that innocent face, as if to say, "Why? I'm just having fun." The Dogman puppy may have been a lot of work, but he was also a lot of fun. He made me laugh, and he brought a sense of joy to my life that I had never experienced before. Even though he couldn't speak, his love was always evident in his eyes and his wagging tail. In the end, I realized that taking care of the Dogman puppy was a unique opportunity that I would never forget. He may have been mischievous, but he was also incredibly endearing, and I was grateful to have him in my life. I will always remember the crazy but funny messes he created and all the joy he brought into our lives that summer. But you know, as much as raising a Dogman puppy can be a handful, there were times when his abilities came in handy, even sort of heroic. One morning, a robin collided with my living room window and was lying still on the ground. My Dogman puppy immediately knew something was wrong and ran over to the bird's side. With his human-like hands, he carefully picked that robin up and cradled it in his arms. We spent the entire day nursing the bird back to health and letting it rest in a warm and safe spot in our backyard. Thanks to my little pup's care and attention, the robin eventually flew away with a renewed sense of life. On another occasion, we were taking a walk by the lake when we heard a loud splash. My Dogman puppy ran to the water's edge and saw a small child crying for help out in the middle of the lake. Without hesitation, my furry pal dove into the water and swam to that child, grasping onto them tightly with his strong hands. He brought the child back safely to the shore, where the parents were astounded. My Dogman puppy's sense of heroism didn't stop there. One day a neighbor's cat got trapped in a tall tree, and the cat owner was panicking as she couldn't get it back down. My little pup's ability to climb trees and use his hands to help others came in handy, as he quickly scaled a tree trunk and helped that cat down to safety. Another thing that set him apart from normal puppies was his intelligence. He picked up on commands and tricks at lightning speed. He was also incredibly curious about the world around him, always exploring and investigating. But perhaps the most striking difference was his ability to communicate. He didn't bark like a normal dog. Instead, he chattered in a high-pitched voice, using a surprising array of sounds that sounded like words. It wasn't long before I realized that my Dogman Pup was almost more like a human than a dog. Of course, having such an unusual pet brought its own set of challenges. People always stopped to stare when we were out in public, and I was constantly bombarded with questions about him that I couldn't answer. One person even asked if he was a person in a dog costume. But despite the challenges, I loved my Dogman Pup fiercely. He was a constant source of curiosity and amusement, always surprising me with his intelligence and his quirky personality. As I look back on my time with the Dogman Pup, I realized that he was a once-in-a-lifetime pet. He was both strange and wonderful, and he brought so much joy into my life. I'll never forget the way he walked upright, or the sound of his chattering voice. He may have been different from any other puppy I've had before, but that's what made him so special. I remember the sad day when the Dogman mom came to collect her boy, who I had come to think of as my own. While she and I stared at each other, the pup pranced outside yapping. To him it was a happy day, because he lived all the time, in the present moment. Sadness is only for those of us who understand when something's ended for good. And with that, the Dogman mother sauntered away with her pup, leaving me gaping after her. I wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or unnerved by her visit. That night, after the two of them left, I felt oddly bereft. The chaos was gone, replaced by an uneasy silence. Even the robot vacuum seemed to miss the puppy. It kept beeping mournfully as it bumped into the furniture. As I settled down to bed, I couldn't help but wonder what other cryptid creatures are out there, watching us mere humans, with their strange, indefinable gazes. And I thank them for providing me with the most interesting summer of my life. Dogman and Son. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I've got a story. Well, actually, I have 3 stories if you want to hear them. They're stories about me, my father, a dogman, and the dogman's father. You might say I sort of grew up with that younger dogman, at least to some extent. First, I'd better explain my father, because he's the only reason this all happened to me. Dad was not sensible. He was too friendly to too many people and animals. He always assumed the best about everyone, even when they were obviously getting ready to screw him over. This is probably why we ended up living in a cabin in the woods and hunting for a living. It wasn't that Dad didn't want to fit in. It was just that nobody else wanted him to fit in. He was an original thinker. And nobody wants a poor guy who can think for himself. That's a dangerous thing to be in the human world. Let's face it, if you're rich, they call you eccentric. But if you are not wealthy, they've got a whole long ugly list of other words that they'll apply to you. If you're born into the working class, you're not supposed to think. You're only supposed to follow orders. So when even my mom left him, Dad raised me in the woods in Pennsylvania. I had learned to read when I still went to school, and I sort of self-taught myself everything after that. We had dusty old books in that cabin that I think had belonged to a previous owner, and I read them all from cover to cover. I always wanted to be a writer, and I guess I still do. I'm hoping to retire in 5 or 6 years, so maybe that can be the time for me to start writing finally. I tell you, your channel makes me want to write stories about these dogmen we used to encounter. I guess this email is the start of me wrapping my head around all those old Pennsylvania dogman experiences. There are a couple of pioneer cemeteries in the woods near the Tuscarora State Forest. Dad and I came upon one of them randomly in the late afternoon one day as the sun was beginning to set, and it was quite a striking scene. Some of the richer people had full-on tombstones, but others had much smaller rocks placed over their final resting places. If they once had names engraved on them, I suppose those names are now as much a part of the past as the individuals whose remains they mark. It was a humbling experience, and a weirdly saddening one as well. There was this heavy mood, as though we had come there to pass on or something. I didn't like it. I wanted to get out of there, but before I could say that to my father, out of nowhere came a small gray puppy, running right up to me, then dancing and jumping at my feet. I don't think I was more than maybe 13 at the time, so the puppy and I instantly started playing and became friends inside of 2 seconds. We were having a ball, and I could hear my father laughing at our acrobatics and antics. Then, something bellowed so loudly that my ears hurt, and my knees went weak underneath me. I had only ever felt my knees do that once before, when we ran across a mama bear, and my mind went directly to the idea that this might not be a puppy that I was playing with at all. This might be a baby wolf. I must be being roared at by a mother wolf. But wait, wolves don't roar, you know? So I was moving my eyes and my head to turn to see what exactly was making that terrible shouting sound. I felt like time had slowed down to an almost halt, and I wondered if this is what you feel when you're about to pass on. When I saw what it was making that sound, my knees actually did collapse, and I fell backward clumsily, trying to catch myself on a tree, but failing. I was sitting on the ground looking up at a very angry canine, but a canine that was standing up on its hind legs. That was a feat I was unable to manage just then. I got a good long look at that mama bear dog thing, and one of the things I noticed was that it was not a mama at all. It was definitely a papa bear, but it was also definitely not a bear. To me, that looked like an upright walking wolf, but the paws were somewhat more like bear claws. I'm not sure what to compare the claws to, honestly, as they look like dog paws, but function more like human hands. Imagine bear claws with the final claw offset more like a thumb. Then imagine it looking somehow very canine. I suppose I'll have to get better at describing things if I really do want to become a writer. The short version of it was that I was looking up at the scariest monster I'd ever seen in my life. And my only question was in which way it was going to tear me apart. Was it going to stomp me out of existence? Was it going to bite my head off? It literally had jaws that looked large enough to do just that. I was seeing my short life pass in front of me. I was so sad about all the things I would never get to do. When I was sitting on the dirt looking up, that Dogman might as well have been as big as Godzilla. That's what it seemed like to me. And I was an ant underneath him. I flinched as I thought I was being attacked from the rear, but it was only my dad. He had walked up and leaned over to pull me to my feet. He whispered at me to be quiet, so I was. After I was standing again, Dad put his arm around me and I hugged him hard. The puppy excitedly and happily danced and pranced all around, jumping up on me in a playful manner. I held my breath because I expected to either be bellowed at again or possibly something worse. Instead, that Papa Dogman just turned around and walked away from us, emerging back into the woodline. The puppy and I returned to playing, and that night he even slept just outside our tent flap as though he were guarding us. In the morning, he was gone. My father told me that the Papa Dogman had come to collect him in the night. To my father, this was the time he was proudest of me. He lectured on and on the next morning about what an honor we had just received. That Dogman respected us as fellow hunters and did not treat us as prey, my father insisted. When he saw me defend you, and when he saw his son's reaction, he realized we were the same as him. We were just carnivores, out carnivoring. Dad had a colorful way of speaking, but you always understood what he was trying to communicate. Even as a kid, I knew he was a screwball, but I loved him anyway. There's no way he would be allowed custody of me in the modern world. He was just too much of an individualist. He was a very proud American as well, which these days they say is a bad thing. Dad was a man of his time, but he was quite a man. Who else would have let his son play with a Dogman Pup? My father and I encountered that Dogman again, and his son 2 more times. Those are 2 more stories I can tell, although they might not be scary enough for your channel. I mean, I guess they're scary in places. I'm an extremely lucky man. I've had multiple encounters with that Dogman family, and I came away unharmed, and I feel enriched. How many people use a word like enriched when describing their Dogman encounter? But that's how I still feel to this day about the time that my father and I encountered. Dogman and son. We're quite grateful, if you can't tell, because of our EP Michelle, Please join me in thanking today's executive producer, Michelle Rich. In return, Michelle receives our secret uncensored Dogman stories far too wild to tell on this channel. YouTube changed something recently to severely limit our channel, and they no longer are serving our videos to people who aren't already subscribed. You need half your audience to be fresh, or else your channel stops growing and moves backward, which is what's been forced on us in the last month and a half. Teenage Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, thank you for your comments on my first entry for your channel, the story about the Dogman and his pup. Thank you for not doubting me or being judgmental. I've been looking for a safe place to get this off my chest for some time. So as I hinted at earlier, there were 2 later times when I saw that same puppy over the next couple years. Each time he looked more mature and taller. This is my account written from memory of the second of the 3 times we ran into each other. The next encounter happened in the fall, most likely late November. We were out hunting for deer, and that's when it's in legal season in Pennsylvania. In one area you've got state game lands number 67, 71, 73A, 147, and 215. Trust me, my father and I made maximum legal use of those areas and times. We'd always take down more than we could eat, and we'd sell the rest to afford our other expenses. Most years we actually lived fairly comfortably, considering our cabin in the woods had no rent or mortgage payments. Even in the lean times, though, we never starved. I don't do it anymore, as the only meat I'll eat any longer is seafood. I feel no guilt about the times we did it to survive, but I think that if I were to hunt now, it would be an immoral act. It was not murder when I innocently helped my father eke out a living, but I'm comfortable now and I don't want to end any more land animals' lives. I guess I've just become an old fool. As for sea life, I once got pinched by a lobster, so now my philosophy is screw sea life, you know what I'm saying? I'm sorry, I'll get serious. This story freaks me out a little, so I tend to start making bad jokes when it comes time to tell it again. My dad was always taking chances and bringing me along with him when he did. One of the ways we'd take unnecessary risks regularly was that we would stay out way too late and then be walking home through the woods when they were at their most dangerous. One night, our luck finally ran out. Dad was walking in front and I was trudging along behind him. We hadn't caught anything at all that day, which is why we had stayed out so much longer. Dad never minded hard work, but he hated doing it for nothing in return. Since I knew he was in a bad mood, I was staying quiet, and we were walking along silently. Something grabbed me by the neck and shoulder and dragged me into the bushes, throwing me down on the dark ground. Before I could call out to my father, I saw a world of teeth in front of my eyes. I wasn't sure who or what had grabbed me yet, but I knew that whoever it was had very large canine teeth, like dinosaur versions of dog teeth. So tall, so wide, that they filled my field of vision as this individual began growling at me in a very threatening manner. I was laying flat on my back, but wishing I could somehow sink into the earth and get myself away from those teeth. I'm not ashamed to admit that my body reacted as though this were the end. The creatures seemed to notice and reared back for a moment, affording me a better view of what this was. It was a Dogman, a dark gray adult upright walking canine. It was extremely tall. I'm a bad judge of height, but it seemed larger than a very tall man, possibly in the range of 6'8" to 8 or even 9 feet tall maybe. I thought it looked just like the Papa Dogman I had seen back during the summer. As I sat up and slid myself backward, away from the Dogman, I saw another canine approaching. It too was a combination of different dark gray fur colors, but this one ran on all fours and appeared about the size of an adult German Shepherd. When it saw me laying on my back on the dirt, its eyes lit up, its tail began to wag furiously, and it ran over standing on top of me and licking my face. It was hard to breathe with that amount of weight on top of me, as this animal seemed to be far more massive than your average German Shepherd. Between that and the licking all over my face, mouth, and nose, I was hardly able to breathe in at all. Whatever this creature was, it sure seemed to like the taste of my skin. I somehow turned myself on my side, getting the beast off my chest. This left me lying there, breathing in and out through a pained chest and pained lungs. Even as I lay on my side gasping for air, the dog licked my face so enthusiastically that it kept making me choke. If this was how it planned on ending my life, at least it seemed more merciful than just tearing my throat open. On the other hand, at least I might go quicker that way. At any rate, I got myself into a sitting position at the base of a tree trunk, and I wheezed for air. The dog continued to dance around me as though something wonderful were happening. I could see the large, upright walking beast man further away, just watching the two of us interact. That was when I made the mental connection. Could these actually be the same two dogmen from the previous encounter? I looked a little harder at the German Shepherd-sized creature, and it did have the sort of face mask look around his eyes, as I remember that puppy having back in the summer. Could this be that puppy grown so large in a few months? Then it finally clicked in my brain that this was who it had to be. It looked like a fully grown dog to me, but it was only a teenager in terms of its development. That cute puppy was going to continue to grow until it was the size of its father, or even larger. It wasn't a normal dog. I mean, this should have all been obvious to me months earlier, but cut me some slack. I was still really young. These first two encounters happened when I was 13, and I had one final encounter when I was, 16. There wasn't any internet back then, and Daddy kept me out of school, so whatever I knew, I had to figure out for myself, and I figured this out for myself. I took a risk that I did understand what was happening, and I stood up. Holding my hands out in front of me, I made a noise like you make when you tell your pet dog to come closer. That canine raced to me on all fours, then stood on its hind legs and rested its arms on either of my shoulders, giving my face a big sloppy wet dog kiss all over for some time. Yep, this was the same couple of dogmen, all right. I called out to my father, and when I didn't hear him call back, I whistled our special secret family whistle. I could hear him arrive behind me amid a torrent of foul language. I guess he couldn't tell if I was calling him to rescue me or what, so I shouted to him before he drew his rifle and shot anybody. He saw that younger dogman, who was at that point around the same size as me when he stood on his hind legs, licking me all over, and he saw that daddy dogman watching the same thing. I wouldn't be surprised if either of the parents looked at each other and shrugged. The puppy still remembered my scent, and that puppy also still clearly saw me as being his friend, on his side. His parents still seemed to be willing to humor his offspring, at least on this subject. Although he clearly didn't care for me or humans in general, the adult dogman was willing to allow his son to make his own decisions about who to be friends with. After saying hello for a long time, the teenage dogman and I started up a fearsome game of fetch. That dogman would leap over some bushes and crash straight through others, rearranging the forest in his wake, just in order to catch that branch that I had flung. My father came to stand closer to me, and we had a conversation each time the dogman ran off to chase my stick. Basically, Dad just kept asking me over and over and over if we could leave yet. Then, the younger dogman would race back, and my father would go hide in the woods again for a while. I just kept telling him the same thing. The game is over when the dogman says it's over, and not a minute sooner. Dad whined like those were my rules, but you don't make rules for a giant puppy. The giant puppy makes rules for you. So, we were playing to the point where I was becoming physically exhausted, when suddenly, the forest erupted in a loud, incredibly long howl. It was then I realized that I hadn't seen the adult Dogman for some time. I wondered if that was who we were hearing making that howl. If not, certainly it was another creature just as large. The Teenage Dogman froze, and I listened. Then, without saying goodbye or even gazing in my direction, the beast ran off on all fours, in the direction of the sound. No doubt it was Papa ringing the dinner bell. I had been dismissed. You know, it felt like my dad treated me differently from then on. I think he saw that I was growing up, that I was starting to be able to handle situations on my own, even situations that he himself wasn't certain how to cope with. He shouldn't have been surprised, though, because he had raised me to take things as they came, and to deal with what you've got to deal with while you've got to deal with it. I am my father's son, and he made me who I am. Still, to this day, years after he's left us, I try to be the man that I think he would want me to be. I hope that makes him happy, as I wasn't sure that I always pleased him in life, and I'm not sure he agreed with my decisions regarding the Teenage Dogman. The birds had Tippy Hedron. We have Fraggy Dendron. You need to smile and not act saggy when you get a comment from Dear Fraggy. Please join me in thanking Fraggy Dendron, who is not only our executive producer for today, but one of the nicest people in our comments section. Please be nice to Fraggy, as she's a big reason we're still around. In exchange for her support, we share various perks with Fraggy, including our secret uncensored Dogman stories, far too wild to ever tell on this channel. The Dogman took a mate. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I'm the guy who told you the stories about the Dogman puppy I played with, and then the second time I encountered him, when he was sort of a teenage dogman or young adult. Both of those times my main fear was not him, but rather his fully grown and extraordinarily gruff father Dogman. The elder one was well over 6 feet tall, possibly over 7. I'm just not a good judge of height. The last time I saw the son, he was the size of an adult German shepherd, and mostly quadrupedal. What I mean to say is that he ran around on all fours like a normal dog most of the time. Once in a while, though, you could see the family resemblance, as this guy would stand up and walk around like a dog-shaped human being. The younger one acted as friendly as the friendliest puppy, but the father was a straight-up wild animal that clearly did not like human beings. He would allow his son to play with me, or at least we played together on those 2 isolated days that I've already described to you in previous emails. I had always had my father with me when I encountered the 2 Dogmen before, and in the same way, they had also been a father-son team both times. Fast forward 2 or 3 years. I was, I think, 16 or possibly 17, and I was hanging with my first serious girlfriend that we can call Marla. Marla and I met purely by chance when my dad got into a fender bender with her dad. I'd like to say I asked her out because she was so pretty and smart, but honestly, it was because she was the first female I'd seen that year under the age of 70. When you avoid the town and stay in the woods, you cut down your dating chances significantly. So Marla got me a job in town, which earned me some more friends and a wider world view. Dad and I just sort of naturally drifted apart. Instead of hunting for my food, I worked jobs and bought food for him and me both out of my paychecks. By that point, half or more of the time I spent in the woods was no longer hunting with Dad. It was strolling hand in hand with Marla. She enjoyed bringing me to her favorite places, and I enjoyed taking her on hiking trails and that sort of thing. Then, one day, we walked straight into a world of very high strangeness. Have you ever been walking along on a warm spring or maybe cool summer day, in love with your companion, each breath of air sweeter than the previous one, and then suddenly the day turns dark, like the sky's been blotted out, the breeze turns into a whistling wind, and the perfectly clear day becomes foggier than London in an old Sherlock Holmes movie? Well, that's what happened to us that day. At first I didn't mind too much, as it made Marla cling more closely to me in the wind. But soon, she pointed out a very large man, moving through the mist, seemingly approaching us. The man was unnaturally tall. Marla started breaking down and crying in my arms, which was not helping me focus my attention on what or who that was out there. I could occasionally make out the silhouette of an immense, muscular man. But then the fog would shift again, and I wouldn't see him at all any longer. At another point, I made out the devil-horned head and the two eyes, glowing almost white-hot, like coals, in its demonic skull. As cool as I had been a couple of years earlier when my father and I had those Dogman encounters, that's how fearful I was in that particular moment. I wasn't with my dad this time. I was with a weeping teenage girl, and I needed to pull myself together. I needed to be the adult in this situation for the sake of my girl, and I needed to regain control of everything before it got really bad for both of us. My dad taught me that most battles are won or lost before they begin, so posturing in front of your opponent can be the key. As much as I felt like crying and hiding inside a tree, I had to act as though I were certain I was the master of whatever was going on. I kept telling myself things in my head like, I got this. But, not exactly that. That's too modern a phrase, but you get my point. Affirmations, they call them now. I think I called it psyching myself up. I made my voice as deep as I could, and I stood as tall as possible. Then I shouted, "Hey, you! Get out of there, see?" Like I was, Sylvester Stallone or something. I waited for a while, Marla sniffling and whimpering behind me, and I could neither hear nor see any reaction at all from the large devil-horned man in the fog. After some time, I drew in a long breath and got ready to shout the challenge one more time. Before I could get out even one word, though, something huge tackled me and slammed me to the forest floor. Marla was screaming and running away as I lay there, more than a little bit stunned. It wasn't a demon, and it wasn't a devil either. The horns I thought I was seeing in silhouette were tall, pointed Dogman ears. I wondered if this was that adult Papa Dogman again, or if it wasn't, it sure looked like him. I tried to look around for his son, my friend, but this guy was rather large and blocked off nearly my entire field of vision. I was pretty big by the time I was that age. I was 6'2", I believe, and I was not finished growing either. With that Dogman over me, though, I felt like a small child in comparison. To say that this was an intimidating experience would not begin to describe it. The dog barked directly in my face with such force that it almost felt like I was being punched out by sound itself. But then the Dogman stopped barking in the middle of one bark and got the strangest look on his dog face. It was a kind of confused expression that I had never seen on any sort of animal before, nor have I seen it again since. Maybe it's better if I can't describe it exactly because I couldn't read its meaning in that moment either. He just stared at me with a look so confused that I kind of got even more scared than it would have seemed possible. Then, the dog quickly repositioned himself, so quickly that I couldn't even move an inch. Now he was out of my face, but he had his nose pressed into my lower belly. He sniffed vigorously as he moved his long snout around my upper legs, my belly button, my crotch. He spent a long time smelling my crotch, and I tried hard not to even breathe. I didn't want to do anything to disturb him while his nose and his immense rows of fangs were poised directly above the family jewels. If I ever get asked what my greatest fear is, I can answer honestly that my greatest fear is to have a dogman stick his nose in my crotch and then start to seem interested in what he's smelling. That's not where you want to be, believe me. So, that dogman was doing that kind of smell that animals sometimes do where their mouth hangs open a bit. I think it allows them to use more senses than just smelling through the nose. I have no idea what kind of information they can get out of using two kinds of smelling at the same time. Maybe they can suss out your social security number, I don't know. Judging by the rapidly changing expressions on that dogman's face, though, he was reading a lot of information out of those smells. The dogman then moved himself forward to put his giant, prehistoric-looking dog head right in my face, and I accepted that my time on the planet was now over. The dogman leaned down, sniffed my face one more time then, licked me vigorously, getting completely sloppy all over me. I was soon giggling, and the giant monster man and I were rolling in the dirt, not fighting at all, but greeting each other. This was not the father dogman, this was the son, all grown up now. The one I had first seen as a puppy, then as a German shepherd-sized teenager. Now he was every bit as large as his father, and I wondered if he was now on his own in the world. Almost as if in answer to my question, the beast leaped up off of me and raced into the woods. I wasn't even back up on my feet yet when he returned, this time with a beautiful white wolf alongside. I didn't understand at first that this was a female, but I soon figured it out through the nature of their interactions with each other. This was his mate. My dogman friend had grown, and now he was going to father another generation of dogmen. I felt proud of him in a weird way, and I wanted him to meet Marla. I called out to her in the woods. But this was real life, not a Disney cartoon from 1947. Marla was long gone. She had fled sometime earlier. That wasn't the last time I saw her, but it was the beginning of the end. It's probably just as well that I didn't get to introduce her to the dogman, as she and I turned out not to be as serious as he and his white wolf mate. I watched as the young dogman couple trotted off bipedally, then dropped to all fours and disappeared at great speed. They can move so quickly, through such tightly compacted places, it's a wonder any of us humans ever see them at all. If we ever succeed in catching a dogman, I bet it'll happen by accident. I don't think we're intelligent enough to outsmart them, not while they have the strength, the agility, and the eons of survival instincts that they have on their side. Now that last dogman experience had a sort of supernatural vibe to it. I mean, it started off with the dogman appearing in that unnatural-seeming fog, as lightning and thunder were off in the background. So people ask me if I think Dogman is from another world in any sense. Do I think it's supernatural or paranormal or from another dimension? Well, I don't know enough to say that it isn't, and I don't know enough to say that it is. The fact that I ran into it 3 times, and it seemed older each time, makes it feel like I was dealing with a natural animal that exists in the same timeline as me and ages like I do. That sounds real in the normal sense, not the paranormal sense. As for the fog in that third encounter, it might have been natural. Since fog is associated with Dogman in a number of other sighting reports as well, though, I wonder if that might be an ability of the creature, like a defense mechanism. He was walking with his mate, who was colored bright white, and therefore would be easier to see in the dark woods. Her coloring would make her more vulnerable out in the wild. What if the fog was the result of the dogman or his mate somehow creating their own cloud cover or cloaking? I know it's bad form for me to present that idea when I can't even guess how an apex predator would be able to auto-generate fog at will, but it did seem very convenient that it was there when it suited him and gone when he wanted me to meet his girlfriend. Then again, that might have also been entirely coincidental and just randomly convenient. I don't know enough to say for sure either way. So it's been many years since this all happened. I've never seen the Dogman again, but I'm rarely in the forest any longer. He aged from puppy into adult at a rate far faster than it would take a human being. Does that mean the Dogman's life expectancy is also shorter than that of a human? Maybe he's been gone for years. Maybe he's still around. I can't know either way. But I'm still very happy that I got to find out when the Dogman took a mate. The Dogman Pup danced to my music. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I am writing to you in order to pass on my personal Dogman story, which is probably more lighthearted than most which you receive. There is a scary part in there a bit toward the end, which I'm going to allow you to edit or rewrite to fit YouTube's guidelines. I would prefer this were used for a public story, not a members-only episode, so I understand that you may need to tone down some language. Just as long as you keep the story straight, I'm sure I'll be happy. I'd rather you left something out than changed it too much, but if you can find a way to include all the details while using the language that YouTube would allow, that might be the best solution. But the scary part didn't come till later for me anyway. Come to think of it, I guess this should have been scary for me from the first second, but I was so dense that I didn't realize that. If anyone out there is listening who doesn't already know this, it's a fact that if you see a young animal in the wild, it's probably just on the other side of some bushes or trees from its much larger and more dangerous mother. If the following story happens to you, please take care for your safety, because no matter how cute, no matter how adorable, no matter how squeezably soft a puppy or kitten or some other small baby creature is, most likely the opposite can be said about its overprotective helicopter mom, okay? So I'm going to tell you about this baby Dogman that I made friends with when I was, I guess, 13-ish years old. My family had just moved from the city to our own home in the country, and we all had a hard time adjusting at first. My parents hadn't realized how hard life would be without a super to call and ask for repairs, as both of them had grown up in apartment buildings. I hadn't realized how hard it would be to suddenly be bottom kid status-wise at school, having to make friends all over again. I had been popular at my last school, and when I came into this new one at first with an attitude that everyone has to like me, I was seen as having a swelled head. Whatever I said or did was interpreted as me showing off, and any success I had was met with my classmates shunning me even more. The only class I felt welcomed in was music, where I had chosen to learn the violin. My grades suffered in all classes except music, where I got along very well with the teacher and my classmates. I also got decent at the violin, and I wanted to learn how to play every song I liked on that instrument. I called it collecting songs because I would commit them to memory like I was a human jukebox. Now, my parents did not appreciate my failing grades, and they hated the sound of me practicing the violin in the house. My mother even went so far as to say that my interest in the violin was the reason I was failing the other classes, and she wanted to take the instrument away from me until my grades improved. Luckily, my father reminded her that violin was in fact one of my classes, if not as important as the others in their opinion. Mom felt as though her hands were tied, but she still banned me rehearsing and practicing in the house. I could either go out to the garage, or I could go out to the woods behind the house. Well, obviously, when the weather was good enough, I walked out to a fallen log in the woods behind the house, and practiced my violin back there. Cue the baby Dogman. I was practicing and learning this Irish jig of one sort or another, when out of the woods danced the cutest puppy in the world, up on his hind legs. He had a dark brown colored body, or rather I mean his body fur was a dark reddish brown. His head was a very light cream color, and he had a wide range of extremely silly puppy face expressions. He was so charismatic and funny that I thought he was a trained stage animal at first. But Then I saw he had only been in time with the music at first by chance. From then on, I saw him kick at the dirt and bounce up and down and forward and sideways in the most haphazard manner any living being ever has. He was so ecstatic when I played that music that he needed to express that joy by bouncing all around on his hind legs like a little man. I called him my little leprechaun friend, and I kept playing until every part of me ached. He was so funny that I hated to stop, but I needed a rest and I plopped down on that log. The pup was immediately on top of me, licking my face and running around onto my lap, onto the ground, around the log, and so forth, yipping all the way. You've heard of Cocaine Bear? Well, this guy was like Cocaine Energizer Bunny. He was a cuteness overload, and I hadn't laughed that hard since I'd moved out to the country. By the way, I guess we mean we lived on the country edge of the suburbs. It was the country to us, though. There were more trees than humans. I had grown up in a small 2-bedroom apartment with windows dirty on the outsides and no balcony. Then suddenly we had a 2-story home with a backyard and a small woods beyond that. Sometimes when I got loud inside, my mother still reflexively told me that I was going to wake up the old people upstairs. That made me laugh the first couple of times, until my father punished me for laughing at my mother. So the baby Dogman licked me all over and got his scent on me and my scent on him. Why was this not noticed later by his mother when she groomed him? Maybe it was, but she just didn't care for some reason? Was my youth a possible factor? Could the Dogman mother have just smelled my age and judged me as being a non-threat? Or could she have actually been watching over our musical playtime together? Might it be possible that the little guy's mother also enjoyed an Irish jig once in a while? When I went home that night from the woods, my original intention had been to carry the puppy home with me. I'm really glad that something inside made me hold back from doing that, though. I wasn't thinking that the mother must be nearby, and I don't really know what made me change my mind, but I'm grateful that it did change. I started walking home, and I called for the pup to follow me, but then it ran away from me into the woods deeper, and I figured it had been decided for me. I got good at playing violin with my bulky overcoat on so that I could extend the season as long as possible, and so that the little leprechaun and I could resume our fun in the spring. There was one time during a string of snowstorms which had made the forest nice to walk through but impossible to sit in or play violin in which the little guy came to visit me in the garage where I was rehearsing. I remember thinking I was seeing someone out the window, but when I would stop playing and look over there, I wouldn't see anyone. Finally, I looked over while playing, and I saw the little brown, black and white leprechaun puppy dog bouncing up and down excitedly to the music, trying desperately to get up on the window ledge. I put my fiddle down, opened the window, and intended to help the puppy come up onto the window ledge. Instead, he tumbled inside on top of me, and we both rolled around on that dirty garage floor, happy to see each other again. Now again, don't try this at home, kids. It's a miracle I didn't get myself in a deep mess with Mama Dogman. Each time I remember these old stories, it's like checking off boxes of everything you should never do in these kinds of situations. And yet, these are the most cherished memories that I have. And it seems like that should be a contradiction, but I'm not certain that it actually is. So I found that if the puppy got too rambunctious, playing a slower or quieter tune, like a lullaby, would put him right to sleep. He seemed to almost be programmable by the mood of the tune's arrangement. If I could calm him down enough that he would take a nap, I would then need to work on other kinds of homework, because violin playing would just get him to jump up and start his manic offbeat version of dancing all over again. I came to feel about this guy like he was my little brother. That's how I put it at the time. It was also the feeling that you have for a pet dog that you love, though. I never experienced that until I was an adult, so it was unfamiliar to me when I knew the dancing leprechaun Dogman. I discovered one warm afternoon that there is one thing that's bad about hanging out with Dogman Pups, and that is that Dogman Pups think comic books taste good. I had 3 comics I borrowed get eaten in front of my eyes before I could get over there to rescue them, and the guy I borrowed them from refused to accept cover price to pay for their replacements. He made me go to a comic book store and buy him the back issues in fancy plastic sleeves. When people ask me if the Dogman is evil, I have to say, nothing good would eat a guy's friend's comic book. There is a case to be made that the puppy might have been truly evil. Another fact I remember about him was that he did not eat fruit. One time I dropped an apple and it rolled down a hill into some bushes. I figured I'd never see it again, but the little leprechaun leaped down into those bushes and hopped back up, delicately handing me the apple with no teeth marks on it at all. This same dog had snuck my bologna sandwich out of my backpack and eaten it before I knew he had it. So that proves that dogmen do not eat apples. The more you know. As spring wore on, I looked forward to being off that summer and being able to spend every single day getting better at violin while entertaining my growing dogman friend. It wasn't to be, though, because my parents decided to send me away to some school where I was told they were going to reteach me the subjects that I had not done well at during the previous year. My parents had in fact decided this much earlier, but sprang it on me the night before I had to leave. This was entirely to save themselves the bother of having to listen to me whine and complain for longer than that one night. They didn't really care if their decision traumatized me, and they cared even less that I had no chance to say goodbye to anyone. When I raised this objection, they told me to write my friends letters from the boarding school, explaining to them where I had went, and that they would all understand. The only friend I cared about, though, was the one who didn't understand my handwriting. He only understood my fiddle playing. My father seemed to think that I would really be tutored on the subjects I had messed up at during the school year. In fact, what happened was, we all got quizzed on the subjects that we had not gotten A's in, and we each got corporal punishment when we got answers wrong. Then we were given textbooks to study, but we were never warned on which chapter we would be quizzed and beaten over next. This led to a frantic bid to speed read the textbooks and memorize as much as possible. We each became experts on different chapters of different books. Then we had secret tutorials for each other, explaining what we learned to each other. Getting caught helping someone learn meant even more corporal punishment. It felt to me that hurting the kids took a higher priority than educating them, although it must be admitted that I did learn to speed read that summer. I also developed a nervous tic, sweaty palms, and a nicotine addiction that it took me over a decade to snap. But I understood math better, and isn't that really the most important thing in life? I would like to say that I rushed out to the woods behind the house on my first day back from that prison school to see my dogman friend. But that would be a lie. My first day back, I was a nervous wreck, desperate to please my parents so that they wouldn't throw me into prison again. I wasn't thinking about going to see my friend out back. I no longer had the self-esteem to think that I should deserve such a thing as a friend. I had learned that my place was to anticipate the needs and desires of my superiors in order to limit the severity of my inevitable punishment. In short, I had become a goody two-shoes mama's boy. And even so, I never seemed to be able to achieve any acceptance at all from my mother, or the dogman's mother, as it turned out. One night I was bringing the evening's garbage out to the cans by the garage in the back, and I unwittingly disturbed a huge predator in the darkness as she was feeding on some smaller creature back there. I moonwalked backward into the light, and the beast lurched forward, putting herself on display as an upright mama canine, as tall as the tallest bear I had ever seen. She moved like a wolf even while remaining upright, and she drooled both saliva and blood as she took in the sight of me. I saw her pupils dilate and begin to glow. It was the most incredible thing I could imagine seeing, and a nostalgic memory at the same instant. This beast had a light-colored dog head, but a dark-colored canine body. This couldn't be my old friend grown up, could it? No, that dancing Dogman Pup was a male. I know he was not female. Even if he could have grown that much over the summer, that still couldn't be him. It definitely could be his mother. But if so, she had not retained any nostalgic memories of me or my scent. The beast woman charged me, fangs first, like a monster from a nightmare. The only thing in my head was that this would be a stupid way to die. I was crying unfair even as I ran away toward the house. I was ready to hit reset and play the scene again. But there's no reset after the Dogman's mother catches you in her massive jaws. There's only sadness and regret, pain, and then whatever comes after this life. Even as I ran as hard as I'd ever run, I felt sadder than I'd ever felt. I was about to become food for my friend's mom. I hope you can understand why I wasn't in a very good mood. I got most of the way to the back door before I realized that I was no longer hearing her chase me. That made me even more frightened as I looked up above me and all around to see where the creature had gotten to. While I was watching everywhere except where I was going, I took a wrong step, and my foot got caught in a rabbit hole or a foxhole or something. I ended up somehow giving myself a cracked leg bone, which was extremely painful and caused me to fall in such a way that I cracked the bone even further before I finally extricated my leg from the hole. For a few seconds, all I could see was bright white pain. But eventually I began to wonder why that Dogman lady hadn't begun dining on me for dinner yet. I was quite surprised to look around and find her back behind me, facing in a different direction. She wasn't even concerned with me any longer. I grew alarmed when I noticed that she had her arms around some man-sized figure. Was I about to see her end some other person's life? The two figures turned a bit to one side, and I could see that she was hugging another, somewhat smaller, Dogman creature with similar color markings to her. Both had darkly colored fur on their bodies, and an off-white colored fur around their heads and ears. I knew the smaller one was my friend, and yet I was too intimidated to call out to him. What if he didn't remember me any better than his mother did? I watched him lope away with her, looking like a teenager version of his former self. I wondered how much taller than his mother he would get to be, and how long it would take him to get there. But mostly I prayed that they would get out of there fast, so that I could start calling out to my parents to help me. I remember an exhausting and painful night at the hospital. That was the first time I ever got a cast or crutches, and my father bought me a video game to cheer me up, but I can't remember which one. I was just glad to be alive, honestly. I did miss the Dogman Pup, but mostly later on, after it became nostalgia. At that time, I had sort of grown scared of him. I don't know if he would still have danced if I had played, since I gave up the violin to make my parents happy. I had changed so much that I wasn't really surprised that he had too. The more years that passed, the more the memories of the Dogman seemed pleasant ones. I mean, most of them were pleasant. If that Dogman had come back and done something bad to me, then I might not have ever grown nostalgic over him. But the fact was that I've never seen any kind of cryptid again in my life, since that night that I managed to break my own leg. So even though my brain keeps telling me that I was a dumb kid who got lucky enough to survive multiple experiences with a feral carnivorous predator, my heart keeps reminding me how much I miss that little flea-bitten varmint. I still pull out my old fiddle a few times a year just for the fun of it. Each time I play anything with a sort of Irish feel to it, the playing brings me back to that time when The Dogman Pup danced to my music. We got a brand new member once again, and his name is John Carnagan. But then again, and all along, he could be pronouncing it Carnagan. Please join us in welcoming brand new channel member John to the fold. He gets to see each of our new Secret Sunday Uncensored stories, and so can you. Just listen to this little announcement by our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank. Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.